This is the second presentation given at the 2024 National Gun Conference. And this is by Shooters Union Australia's David Brown on the topic elections and how to gain influence in politics. Is featuring David again, and it's actually elections and how to gain influence in politics. And David is the National Vice President of Shooters Union Australia. He has a background in mechanical engineering and aviation and is an instrument-rated pilot and engine management educator. David has been involved with Shooters Union since 2015 and has a particular focus on countering the damage caused by irrational gun extremists. And I think David Lionhelm used the word homophobe earlier on, and that's going to get another run a little bit later on. So we will go to you, David. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Neil. And if I was as well educated in the English, I was going to say the English sports, the English language, I probably would have a word like hoplophobe. But anyway, I'm going to kick off with something a little bit. I'm going to sort of be a little bit daredevilish. We're going to do some myth busting. So this is going to be not quite like the guys you would have seen on TV, but myth busting. The National Firearm Agreement was a raging success. Or was it? Now, particularly for people who are going to be watching this down the track, not today, but down the track, you'll be able to pause, you'll be able to go away and do some research of your own. And this research, it's out there, like the data is out there for all the countries that I'm going to talk about. And you can find this yourself. I dug it up initially back in about 2016 when I started getting involved with Shooters Union. And I was staggered to learn the rhetoric that we've been given from our political leaders is that the National Firearms Agreement post Port Arthur did a wonderful thing for firearm deaths in this country. And John Howard gets held up on this pedestal, the gold standard of gun laws globally. And John Howard, to this day, is held in such high regard with his implementation of the National Firearm Agreement. Now, so much so that political parties, Labor, Liberal, National, anyone, is reluctant to do anything that might go anywhere near breaking down little elements of the National Firearm Agreement. In fact, I've coined the phrase the National Firearm Disagreement because every state seems to disagree anyway. So you can go and pull the data on what happened. And I've been saying for years, John Howard's gun laws were that awesome. They were fantastic. We had a decline in gun deaths. And if you go and ask someone in the media, they'll give you the stats, 1996, 97 onwards, say 97 onwards after Port Arthur. We've had a decline in firearm deaths. Isn't that wonderful? John Howard's gun laws worked. Really? Let's have a look at this graph. And I did this quite simply. It's uncluttered of numbers and anything complicated. You'll notice that Australia, the blue line at the bottom, over a period of roughly 40 years, has had a constant decline in firearm deaths. Now, did John Howard's gun laws work prior to them being implemented? How do you have a constant decline before a point in time and attribute the gun laws to achieving an outstanding result when the trend was fairly constant the whole way through? And so you sort of get a bit of a question in the back of your mind, well, what about New Zealand? New Zealand's a lot like Australia, similar culture, similar kind of regulatory environment, different gun laws, of course, but look at the New Zealand curve. That's the one just above ours. In fact, if anything, in raw data terms, they were slightly worse per 100,000 population. So you go, okay, New Zealand's only a very small little country. Maybe it's an anomaly. And I then sat down and went and looked at Canada because I thought Canada would be, another similar kind of, come from a similar background. And then you hold up the Canadian numbers, and that's this one here. There's a constant decline from back in the 70s. In fact, actually, for some of these countries, I could find data going further back than 1980, but not all of them. there was a decline going back into the 70s there, just like there was here in Australia. So you've got to say John Howard's gun laws were absolutely brilliant, absolutely fantastic. They not only worked here, they not only worked 20 years prior, but they did the same thing in Canada and New Zealand. And if you're intellectually honest with yourself, you can't believe for 1 minute that the National Firearm Agreement did anything to assist. And then people say, and David Lionhelm's mentioned already, we get compared to the US. Well, God, I can tell you, John Howard's gun laws were so awesome. Look what they did in the US back between 1980 and 1997 and continuing on. I mean, it flattened out a little bit, but there's been a decline in firearm deaths in the US as well. John Howard, I don't know why he's not given a knighthood. I mean, really. So I want everyone to think, particularly when you're talking with people in the political arena, to, in a very condensed way, point out that this is real data. This is not made up by me. Anyone can go and research it, but it is real. So why is it that anyone, anybody, nobody, no politician, nobody should give credence or credit to the NFA, and most importantly, any of the laws and regulations that are pinned to the NFA, which is literally most of them. So, as we all know, criminals don't follow laws, only law-abiding people do. I think the NFA was a gross tragedy in itself, and the fact that we think that legislation, the way it is and the way it's going, is supported by the National Firearm Agreement, is fatally flawed. And we should really look to, at every opportunity, bringing into the discussion some reality and look at the real problem, not the perceived problem. So one of my pet topics is the firearm industry, the shooting industry, and we're going to call them one and the same because the shooting sports, agriculture, etc., and the industry, that's dealers, etc., manufacturers, we're all in this together. One doesn't go without the other, or if one goes, the other goes, and that is actually a significant risk. How do we affect change, political change? And the only way you're going to get change is through politics. I mean, police departments will constantly look for better ways to make our life more miserable, so much so that they implement policies that are not lawful. And that happens in every state. We're seeing a major assault on that here in Queensland at the moment. So I got involved with Shooters Union back in 2015, 2016, and it was a rather opportune time because founders, Graham Park, Jen Lindsley, and a few others had started to realise that whilst the organisation was growing, how could we achieve more impact and more influence in the political and regulatory world? Well, somewhere around about that time, Graham wisely selected a company called Cole Lawson that was run by a lady, Margaret Lawson, one of the country's leading communication and media companies. And her, and along with Nathan Schultz, who we still do some work with today, started a program of raising awareness and credibility for Shooters Union, but also just generally speaking, the shooting community. They were working for us, obviously, and we invested significant money in this process, but this also applied to any other group that, in the, whether it be the Clay Target Association or SSAA or whoever, doesn't matter. Once you raise the awareness and the credibility of an industry, the rising tide lifts all the boats. So we had a concentrated effort on making sure us as individuals had media training so that when asked a question in the media, we didn't say something stupid, but we also got the message out in about 10 to 12 seconds. And that gained us far more TV and radio exposure than ever before. I must admit, I got a 10-second quote on Channel 10 TV once over the fellow who confronted a burglar in the middle of the night and with a firearm in his hand, took the individual into the local police station. A week later, they came back and confiscated all his guns. Allegedly, it was unloaded, and I made the comment, well, effectively, he was just carrying a stick. Well, that obviously was, a fairly fresh take and a funny take on, dealing with someone with a firearm, but it was really only a stick. And that made it into the media. So sometimes your little 10-second opportunity, your 10 seconds of fame can be very profound and it can convey a significant message. So you've got to make sure you're doing a good job of it. I'm not sure that that was my best effort ever, but certainly that one went somewhere. So getting more media quoting of an organisation, and this applies to unions, farming groups, industry groups of all sorts. Politicians and their staff troll the newspapers, the TV, radio news. They really do pay attention to the mood of the public. And the best way to measure your influence in the public arena is how you're portrayed in the media. So this was something that we worked very, very hard on. And by about 2019, I don't remember the exact dates, but that was about the time we employed a media director. And he has a very long career with one of the major publishing firms and still does other freelance media and publishing work. But it brought us the ability to be able to react when us as volunteers might be off doing other things. He had his finger on the pulse of what was going on around the countryside, in the media, politically or otherwise. But being someone that was able to craft a good delivery or craft a press release in such a way that we didn't embarrass ourselves or say something stupid meant that we had a consistent, persistent, professional front. So what did that do for us in the political world? Well, all of a sudden, our acceptance in the political sphere, both state and federally, ratcheted up at a great rate. We were given far more airtime, as it were, in the political arena, and we were treated more seriously. And one of the serious outcomes of being treated very seriously was I'm just trying to think now, was it 2019, 18 Queensland election? I forget the date. The Queensland Firearm Dealers Association ran a campaign called Flick 'em, Put the Majors Last. Now, that originally started as Put Labor Last, because obviously the current Labor government and the Adler shotgun, lever action shotgun debacle. So at that time, we were having regulatory changes in all the states recategorizing lever action shotguns and 5-round magazines versus 8. In Queensland at the time, we had the opportunity for the Liberal National Party, with support of the crossbench, to roll the government on this regulation change weeks before the state election. The one time we could have given the Labor Party a good caning, and this was it. And Graham had worked very extensively with the LNP. Robbie Catter and Shane Knuth were on side, and I'd worked closely with 2 ex-Labor but then independent MPs. And oddly enough, we had them on side 100%. So it went to the floor of Parliament, and at the 11th hour, we had the 2 Catters, we had the 2 independents, and we had one Liberal National guy, Tony Perrott, and we, to this day, applaud Tony Perrott for his brevity. The LNP rolled on us at the last minute. So this Flick 'em, Put Labor Last got completely rebuilt at significant expense to Flick 'em, Put the Majors Last. Now, what did that do? They say elections have consequences. Well, that particular action had consequences. And sometimes you've just got to smack the political parties across the snout, a bit like a rolled up newspaper on a naughty dog. The net result of put the majors last meant they might still get elected, but they lost a significant amount of primary vote funding, millions of dollars. And the Liberal National Party didn't want to meet with us for quite some time. They were hurt. The Labor Party were as well, but they tended to keep their cards closer to their chest. The LNP eventually met with us, and didn't they give us a bit of an unloading on what it cost them and the number of staffers they had to let go? And we literally said, well, you treat us this way, pat us on the head, rub our tummy, then stab us in the back. You've got to listen. So having the ability to show strength, and David Leyonhjelm talked about strength in numbers, that whole campaign up to that election, the Dealers Association, the Sporting Shooters Association, SSAA, had a big contribution with the Flickham campaign, and Shooters Union ran a whole bunch of other in parallel media work in radio and print. We had a major impact on that election. We also got Nick Demetto elected. We also got Stephen Andrew elected to Parliament in later years, and that's been a fantastic thing. So having a good relationship with media brought us a better respect with the political parties, and where we are today is that we've got much better relationships across the board, and that includes industry relationships with other groups, dealers, parties, and other sporting groups. And we're not treated as just some little minority interest group. So now that we're noticed and can't be ignored, we're now in a position where we can affect change. And that's happened numerous times where we've been able to influence an outcome or modify an outcome to be more suitable to the likings of industry, and particularly during the COVID period, there's a lot of things that we rolled back there. Our constant challenge, though, is legislative change that is not in our best interests. And right now, we have a particular here in Queensland, but we've got it in Western Australia and in just about every state. Any government can literally do what it likes because there's nobody holding a balance of power. So this is where we need to get more political. I know a lot of people in the shooting sports, shooting industry, no, not really interested in politics. Well, my answer to that is, if you're a firearm owner, you are interested in politics. End of message. Don't care what you think, you are interested in politics and you need to be involved. So we as the shooting community need to step up. The only way we're going to improve our lot is interact with the political parties, with the political process, and we need to stand up and be accounted for. Over to you, Neil. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. And just as a bit of a footnote to working with parties, there was a similar exercise in Victoria in the early 2000s. It was led by the Combined Firearms Council of Victoria. And that was actually a collaborative effort. It was led by SSAA Victoria, and it brought in the Victorian Clay Target Association, Victorian Amateur Pistol Association, Target Rifle Victoria, the Victorian Rifle Association. There's probably about a dozen or so groups that got together after the 2002 handgun restrictions, because it was realised that this was not a discussion about handguns, this was about policy. And one thing that came as a result of that was, this is a policy from 2006 from the then Brax Labor government, and you can see it's a joint policy for the four-wheel driving, but it also brings in hunting. And it's not often we see governments bring out specific pro-hunting policies. We are going to see one a bit later today from the Northern Territory, but I think that this, whilst this particular document is not overly exciting, it's where we got to get the parties to think, and I think that part of that Flickham campaign actually achieved that. So this document, whilst it harks on a bit about things that the government did, to help shooters, mostly to do with hunting, including supporting duck season, just sort of general things like that. There was also money for um, shooting clubs, but that was actually a consequence of the 2006 Commonwealth Games that were being held in Victoria at the time. And but going forward, the government did make some commitments to again facilitate hunting in Victoria. So whilst I'm not going to go into the detail of this now, but whilst the particular content here isn't overly exciting from a legislative point of view, it was nevertheless good to see governments articulate a position in the lead up to an election that was actually on our side. So I just wanted to point that out because it was uh, it was just an example of what some of the things that can be done. Now we want more than that. We need better politicians in place. We need better policy. We need better laws. But I think that's part of the progression that we need to go.
Yes, Neil, if I may just add to your previous comment on Victoria, look at the duck hunting issue just recently in the last 12 months, where the CFMEU, I think, came along to, back then it was the Andrew government, and they literally said, if you do anything to affect duck hunting in Victoria, construction on all your state government construction projects will cease. And mysteriously enough, any ideas of duck hunting restrictions went straight into the waste paper basket or the shredder. So it just proves that, and that didn't come from a shooting industry organisation, that was a union.
Yep.
So it just proves that enough people get motivated about something, you can affect change.
Yeah, and that is also to recognise the role of the ETU, as was just pointed out to me. So,
Yeah.
it was very much obviously a pressure point for the Labor government in Victoria. Anybody else want to talk about the matters that David raised?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. Look, I wanted to thank David Brown's and David Lionhelm's efforts, particularly on the Adler ban as well. As an Adler owner, I appreciate that people had stood up and talked sense about the issues at the time. I don't know if well, I didn't hear it was discussed earlier about the technology aspect of it. As the anti-gun lobby, the hysteria at the time was talking about the Adler firearm being new technology, and they say this every couple of years. There's always some type of a witch hunt that discusses some new firearms technology, which is completely unfounded. As a lever action firearm, I believe the design itself is modelled off of the 1877 or 1887, I should say, lever action firearm. So very old technology, nothing new there. And I think if there wasn't people like them standing up and telling sense on this, we would have probably seen an outright ban on these types of firearms. So I'm very grateful for that.